This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we speak to Jovana Maksić. She's a scientist, analyst and political activist from Serbia. She's going to be talking to us about the recent upset over there where the government has allegedly, but quite clearly, rigged the recent election and consolidated power completely for himself, which has led to attacks on opposition parties, clashes with protesters, all sorts of stuff. Jovana is going to explain what's happened. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, support us at patreon.com/popularfront. Before we go into the clashes that happened recently in Serbia, let's go into why they happened. So this election, this allegedly stolen election, I don't think it's even really allegedly at this stage, right? I think there's quite a lot of evidence, even proof, that it was pretty much rigged. Let's go into that. What happened?
So the most recent elections were basically snap elections, and they were held on December 17th. And here we saw the president, Aleksandar Vučić, and his Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, taking victory. But as you said, this victory was marked with very serious electoral fraud, which then led to this wave of protests. So one of the biggest concerns that was raised by the opposition and also just citizens documenting this kind of stuff was a really blatant manipulation of the voting process. So some of the most blatant cases involved bussing in about 100,000 people who don't live in Serbia, but they came from Bosnia, they came from Montenegro, Macedonia, and they were basically paid to vote in Belgrade and also probably in other cities as well. They were given fake ID cards, they were assigned addresses that don't exist, while voting in a city, in a country, and where they don't reside, simply. So other than that, we also witnessed countless cases of pressure, intimidation, blackmail, all of this by Vučić's SNS party. We also saw a lot of saturation with Vučić content in the media, which was insane because he officially isn't even the president of the party anymore, and this is technically illegal, showing his face every single day on TV and everywhere. Then they also basically took phantom voters, or there would be dead people who gave votes as well. Even the diaspora, like voting in other countries, couldn't do it because some of the websites were taken down. So the list goes on, and basically these elections were really blatantly stolen right in front of everyone's eyes. But I think that this time the pressure and the capture was much stronger than of Slobodan Milošević, for example, in the 90s. And it just felt extremely humiliating to see something like this, especially because this year, and we kind of talked about this on the last episode, there was a lot of momentum in civic unrest, in protests, and also with the opposition. There was even some hope, if I can even say that some things might change. So there was a lot of effort into making sure that these elections go as smoothly as possible. There were like volunteer observers who would check if everything is going well at the voting booths. There were also a lot of international observers. But despite all of that, Vučić still won and basically stole the elections in a very, very horrible way in front of everybody.
Right. Well, there was this hope, like you said. How is it that he was able to just do this without any of that hope kind of coming back against him? Because like you said in the last episode, people were ready for change. There was huge protests simply against the kind of malicious nature of the government, of the state, of the culture in some ways. How is it that he's just managed to steamroll past all that?
Well, the problem is that this person holds absolute power in all of the state institutions in Serbia.
Vučić.
Exactly. Vučić and his Serbian Progressive Party. So what we see in Serbia is basically a one-party system. And first of all, there wasn't even much of a media frequency allowed for other parties, not even the opposition, but there was also some smaller right-wing parties that were going against Vucic as well, but they didn't even get any time on television. Like, people were not even able to see that there are these other options. And on top of that, when this party has infiltrated every single institution in the country, it's very difficult to be able to do anything against it. Like, they basically just entirely took over. They have so much power that they're able to bring all of these people from different countries, pay them, and also just everybody was getting constantly blackmailed. Like, my parents were getting phone calls every single day. They were even getting people from Vucic's party come to our house and deliver all kinds of gifts and stuff like that. So you can imagine that this happens with everyone in Serbia. People are poor in general. People don't have much to hold on to. So when one party is pressuring you this much, it's really difficult to do something else. That's not to say that the momentum doesn't exist on the opposition's part. It really does. But it's really difficult to get this momentum out from Belgrade and into the entire country, basically.
Why would Vucic be heading, for example, to your parents' house? Why would they do that? Are they target people that are powerful, or is it just anybody?
Anybody, basically anybody. Like, these people want to have complete power and complete control over everything in the country. And there's also a big part of the population that supports his party. You know, there were people celebrating because the people who profit off of this regime, they basically want things to stay the same because then they can stay rich while everybody else is still staying poor and not having enough frequency to even voice other opinions that are different. But I think the really messed up part is that the opposition kind of knew that in the region, on like the regional level, they were not gonna win these elections. But there was some hope that at least in Belgrade, where people have a bit more access to other kinds of media, where people can directly see and are more vocal about the regime and its effects on the streets, there was some hope that the opposition would win. And that was basically like the forecast. The opposition was going to win Belgrade, which would mean a small step going towards a future where potentially they could have more seats in the parliament and more changes can happen and no more shady stuff can be done like this in the capital. But when Vucic came on TV and said that even Belgrade was theirs, that's when you really know that the proportions of this fraud were quite epic. And my dad even compared it to the 90s, to the time of Slobodan Milosevic. And he said that at the time, the population was still kind of polarized. Like, the people could see that the current regime is committing genocide in other places. So it was not that difficult to then join the cause of going against Milosevic. But right now, it feels like Vucic just has so much power and like has captured the majority of the media space, more importantly. And that makes it much more difficult to exit this regime.
And so what did the opposition party do when they realized basically they hadn't got anywhere near to what they wanted? Do they have any plan? How powerful are they?
Yeah, so they did have a plan, and some of this was also to be expected, especially because, weirdly enough, the night before the election results were announced, the opposition leaders were actually invited by the police for questioning. And the police said that they got tips from Russian services and also from Vucic that they were going to organize big protests and big demos after the results. So it looks like Vucic already had all of this planned out. So what the opposition did was basically shortly after the election results were announced, they went to the Republic Electoral Commission building, or RIC, which is basically the place and the entity that has the power to formalize the new government. So what they wanted to do is they brought all of this evidence. There were hundreds, thousands maybe, of documented cases of fraud. And they wanted to bring this to the building before the first real government was formalized. So they came, also a lot of citizens came, and they were protesting and requiring that they should release them into the building so they could give this evidence. But unfortunately, the Electoral Commission said that this election was entirely fair. Nobody even acknowledged that there was some kind of electoral fraud happening. So it's very difficult to even get their voices heard when the institutions of the country are not even acknowledging truth. So this is not we're not talking about empirical truth. We're talking about absolute political power, and you cannot go against it.
And so, where has this idea come from that the elections were rigged? This was mostly external and opposition, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was so blatantly obvious to everyone who even had access to internet because they could see all of these videos of like people leading a bunch of people, paying them to come and vote, explaining like, oh, you should just, yeah, go straight there. That's where you vote. They're going to give you your, your alleged address in Belgrade. It was so blatantly obvious. And it still felt really desperate because what can you do? You have all this information. None of the institutions are listening to you. Like the oppositionaries even started a hunger strike, some of them, and they lasted for almost 2 weeks. And this is one of the most extreme measures that in any real democratic system would usually catch the attention of the regime and there would be some kind of response. But in this case, Vucic could not honestly give two fucks about it. Like there was no reaction at all. And this is just because this party doesn't care about any other opinion. And not that it doesn't care, it actually attacks the other oppositionaries. It attacks the journalists, anybody who tries to say anything different.
Mm. So you said a minute ago that the opposition were arrested and questioned. Vucic said that, surprise, Russian intel said that the opposition were planning to have protests against the result. Why would they then be arrested for protesting, even if that were true, that they were planning it? Why would that be an arrestable offense?
I mean, technically, they were not arrested at night. They were just called in for questioning.
Okay, so like intimidation.
Exactly, intimidation. Yeah. And they also communicated publicly about it. And that's where it kind of, things were starting to build up before the election results. And we knew that because things have been gradually building up and that's just continuing. But I think the biggest buildup and maybe the most kind of provocative thing that happened was after these numerous protests where the opposition was basically trying to say, okay, please look at the evidence, do something. Nothing was happening. Then you had all these students kind of organizing a new wave of protests requiring that the Electoral Commission opens up the lists basically to just say, look, none of this stuff is fair. But then on December 24th, while the West was celebrating Christmas Eve, there was another big protest that took place where the tension started running really high. So here, the opposition leaders and the citizens actually tried to enter the city hall of Belgrade. And basically, they wanted to go into the building peacefully, climb on top, and wave to the people as a sort of symbol that there is still some hope and there's knowledge that all the votes were basically taken away, that you still have some value in your vote. But then when all of this massive people started approaching the front door, it became clear that inside the building was riot police already waiting, which was really weird. Like, how did they know? How did they know that all this crowd was going to come there? Why were they like armed to the teeth? They were like literally standing right on the door. So you were not even able to enter. And people, the oppositionaries, they tried talking to them in a sensible way. I mean, obviously, tensions were running high. Everyone was yelling and screaming and wanted to enter. But after numerous attempts of trying to even keep a conversation with the riot cops, none of this was possible. The riot police would just spray pepper spray directly into their eyes, into their mouths. It was really dirty. And then all of a sudden, you would start seeing these very violent figures at the door, and you were like, who is this? And it shortly became clear that these were either like undercover cops or inserted elements, as we like to call them, which is a very common tactic at protests that Vucic uses. Basically, like paid hooligans who have the role of making sure the protest goes from one level to the absolute 100. And that is then the basically justification for the riot police to start going on the people. So after this boiling point was reached, after these provocateurs were throwing like massive objects into the building, they were cracking the windows, there was glass everywhere, it was really insane. Then all the cops actually exited the building and they very violently continued to chase away the people. And they were kind of pushing all of them into the center of the city, and they didn't even let them leave the premises. So at this point, I mean, I was just watching the stream live, and it kind of went on into the early nights, basically like 2 or 3 or even 4 a.m. And it just looked absolutely insane to see all of these cars of special riot police roaming around. And then, of course, they continued beating up people, particularly several young students. Some of them who voted for the first time in their life were getting absolutely beaten by these cops with brutality that we haven't seen for years. And that night, they actually also attacked journalists, peaceful protesters, and they arrested about 40 young students. So it was really depressing to see all of this. And what Vucic said, weirdly enough, he basically used this aggressive rhetoric like, all of you thugs are trying to enter in my building, and I'm staying here because I'm brave. And then he went on to make fun of the people, saying that they ran like rabbits away from the police. And this is just insane.
So he's like goading the protesters, like, haha, you ran away, as if he wants the clash.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he does, because that just confirms his sort of like theory that all the people are thugs, all the oppositionaries are thugs, and that they're just trying to take away and destabilize the country away from him.
Yeah, I just looking at a clip you sent me, and it's interesting. There's two types of police. So you've got the ones in black with all in black, helmet, kind of a hooded jacket, and then there are another group of police. They're in black jackets with the helmet, but they're wearing like green combat trousers. I mean, they look different. What is that?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, but there was some hints that some of the riot police were also Russian, like Russian forces. And we don't really have that much information on where these different forces come or who ordered them. But like you mentioned, at the start of the protests, the Prime Minister, Ana Brnabić, actually thanked the Russian intelligence services for warning the Serbian government and the opposition planning to destabilize Serbia. So, like I said, when the oppositions were invited to the police station before, and then there was really truly this big protest and like bad stuff happened. But then this just seems like the plan that was already orchestrated even before the election results came out. And weirdly, the day after this really horrible night, the Russian ambassador in Belgrade and even the foreign minister himself, Sergei Lavrov, they all compared the protest with the so-called Maidan protests in Ukraine, which then led to the overthrow of the pro-Moscow government. So this analogy was then picked up by a bunch of like pro-Vucic and pro-Putin tabloids in Belgrade, and they just began like amplifying this theory, like, oh, the protests are this attempt of the West to create a colored revolution. So it seems like Russia is very much involved in the current protests in Serbia. They're sharing information. They are directly targeting activists with their names, their history, where they are, what they're doing. There's all these Russian Telegram groups that are kind of tracking what's happening. So this is really getting out of hand.
Popular Front is entirely grassroots and independent. Subscribe to our Patreon for hundreds of exclusive bonus episodes, extra video content, access to the Popular Front network, and much more. It keeps us moving forward and you get lots of exclusive content. Subscribe at patreon.com/popularfront. Yeah. And we heard a lot of that, showing the evidence of these elections being rigged. You'll see a lot of Serbs saying, no, this is just EU colonization propaganda, but it's. I mean, the truth is on the wall. I couldn't give a fuck if it's EU, Russia, whatever. Whoever was stuffing the ballots was very clearly doing it. Like you said, you witnessed it firsthand. Is that like a prevalent opinion out there still, that like anything against Vučić is like, you know, it can't be real, it has to be like this Western conspiracy?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there is still quite a big part of the population that's very sort of skeptical of the opposition. And on the one hand, I agree. I agree with certain aspects. I do think the opposition, the current opposition, was not well equipped to deal with this kind of monster. I feel like they were not violent enough, actually, and they were not sort of persistent enough with their plans. And I feel like it's kind of nice that there was this new wave of young people who were really, really pissed off. And of course, it's not ideal, right? It's not, there can always be improvements in the opposition. But then again, like, do you choose that or do you choose Vucic and like living in a mafia run country? And that's one of the big problems why there's still a big part of the population that's like, oh, these protests are not going to do anything. And basically, there won't be any change. Like, we don't want Vucic, but at the same time, we don't want these like pro EU kind of Western forces that say that Serbia should just recognize Kosovo and stuff like that. And I have these conversations with people all the time. And it's quite frustrating because you're sort of like accepting the status quo and you're being a bit lazy about the research and like, okay, sure, like you have this criticism, but then how do you want to use that? Like, where do you get the help? Like, if the EU is not helping, then who's going to help? China? Like Russia? No.
Pick the devil you want, basically, right?
I mean, basically. And also, like another really insane thing that I wanted to say about this, which I think is particularly important for this like sentiment that exists. There is a really weird figure, and we might have talked about him in the last episode, but he was the former head of Serbia's state security. His name is Aleksandar Vulin, and he was also recently sanctioned by the US because of his ties to corruption. But basically, this person, who is no longer the head of the Serbian state security, now was just appointed to be the new senator of Republika Srpska, which is the Serbian-controlled part of Bosnia, by its president, Milorad Dodik. And what's really weird about that is that these politicians are beginning to create, or they have been creating, a kind of narrative that specifically talks about what we just said, right? Like the West is trying to instill these colored revolutions and NATO, and there's all these troops around Serbia. So that means that we have to kind of protect our people. And he formed this narrative or this idea, which is really interesting and weird. It's called the Serbian world. And when he was just appointed a couple of days, mind you, all of this happening during the protests, he was appointed a senator in Bosnia. And then he said, basically, and I can even like read a quote, the people that have no experience of their soldiers, of their policemen, they have no right to give up on merging and unification, no right to give up on the Serb world. And for the Serb world to become, Serbia must be economically successful, led well, have an army that is capable of preserving it, and the Serbs, no matter where they live. To preserve such Serbia, we must do everything to continue the policy of Aleksandar Vučić. And this is the idea of the Serbian world. It's basically this very fluid, kind of like multi-dimensional concept, which just means everybody who is a Serb and who identifies as a Serb, I don't know who can that be, but that's very interesting. Everybody should be just governed by Vučić.
Sounds a very kind of Putinist attitude, actually.
It is. But then, you know, if you point out these points to like people who are kind of like criticizing the opposition, and you're like, well, you do know that this Serbian world idea is being thrown around by like war criminals or former war criminals. And they're like, no. I mean, we are respecting every agreement. There's nothing like NATO is the one who has all the troops. But then it's like, yeah, we're respecting the agreement. But like the president of Republika Srpska just threatened that he's going to rip up the Dayton Agreement from 1995. Like threatening literally that the peace agreement is gonna vanish.
Yeah, it's a very precarious thing to do in such a region as well. Like it's okay, yeah, okay, he's probably just talking whatever, but that kind of talk in a region like this is super dangerous, right?
Exactly, exactly. And this is the idea that you are flirting with. And all of these people who are like, the opposition sucks. I mean, Vucic sucks, but at the same time, we need to, protect the Serbian people. Like, yeah, you're allowing them to take this narrative and just continue it with that kind of like apathy. So I would rather have some young students and like some opposition be on the streets than nothing.
Yeah. Well, there was another incident, right? So the opposition guy, Sandalovic, he was beaten up. Who did that?
Well, I think that in order to talk about what happened to him, maybe we should just like reinstate for context the stuff that happened in the Banjska attack. So basically, like imagine that all of these students that were just in the protest are in jail and they're still in jail. But the state-funded terrorist who committed the Banjska attack in Kosovo, Milan Radojičić, is released from prison. So what happened is on September 24th, Serb militants basically attacked Kosovo police as they responded to a situation where the trucks were lacking license plates, something kind of like ridiculous. But basically, there was this really big clash at a monastery where multiple people were killed in the end. And the person that led this attack, who was released, Milan Radojičić, as I said, is an Interpol wanted literal terrorist. So this person is out and about, right? And then that you mentioned this,
Okay, just chill, let him out. It's all
oh
good.
yeah, I mean he also like owns this villa, like literal villa, and it's just insane that like a state terrorist like this lives in that kind of premise while most of the people in Serbia are earning like 200 euros a month, just for context. But then, like you said, what happened is this politician Nikola Sandulovic, who is the leader of the opposition Republican Party, he posted a video of himself paying tribute to one of the founders of the Kosovo Liberation Army, who was killed by Serbian police in 1998. And his family was also killed. So basically, he was giving out a rose and specifically on the grave of a young child, a young Albanian child. And what happened is that he was kidnapped and taken from his house, and then he was took for questioning to basically like the Serbian Information Agency office, where he was beaten by about 15 men. And one of them is this person, Milan Radojičić, who we just talked about, like the terrorists who orchestrated this Banska attack in Kosovo. So they took this politician for just paying his tributes, paying his respect to dead Albanian children. And they basically beat him up. There was even some reports of him being poisoned. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it seems like he is suffering serious neurological damage. There were like footage of him completely unresponsive and destroyed. And it turns out that Aleksandar Vulin, the founder of the Serbian world ideology, actually ordered and he claimed responsibility for ordering his arrest. So this person is now going to get prosecuted in court for basically going against the Serbian government and for doing something that's so punishable, like paying his respects.
Wait, so Sandalovic is gonna get prosecuted after being beaten up by, I mean, Balkan Insight, I think, even said it was like secret services, like basically.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's straight from the state, and he's the one that's gonna get prosecuted.
Yeah, that's the most recent thing I've read. And this sounds like Belarus, no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because even Alban Kurti, the he's like president of or prime minister, I forget which they use, of Albania, of Kosovo, right? Even he has come out and been like, yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, this is a crime. Like, why have you done this to Sandalovic?
I mean, I wouldn't say even him because I feel like he very much appreciates when things like this happen because this also plays into the larger narrative of like showing to the West, like this is what Serbia is doing.
Right.
And I mean, like, I'm also a Serbian person, and sometimes when I see these posts that are like, Serbia is a terrorist state, we should sanction Serbia, like that's painful to see, because for all the people who are struggling internally, who are trying to resist Vucic, to then get sanctioned by the West is very, very, very scary. But I have serious doubts that any of this will happen. And I think that's because the West has largely had a very mild policy on Serbia compared to the neighboring Balkan countries. I think like the Biden administration and also the EU is very afraid of Vucic leaning towards Russia or China, which he's kind of like flirting with, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's quite handy for him. But still, it's like it's out there, like everybody's pretty aware of it. What was the kind of response to this in Kosovo? In Serbia to Sandilovic being attacked and beaten up?
Strangely enough, I haven't seen much reporting on it. Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, I mean, I was mostly just following Twitter posts, and I know that like Balkan Insight and like international analysts who are familiar or like live in Serbia have written about it, but I haven't seen much local coverage, which I thought was a bit strange.
That's a super serious issue. Like the fact that the elections were pretty much stolen, and then the opposition leader gets beaten up to the point where he has to go to hospital. Is that a step up, would you say, in terms of the kind of totalitarian nature of the government there in Serbia? Or is this, par for the course? To me, from what I understand, mostly through speaking to you, this seems like even this is quite wild for Serbia, right?
It is quite wild, but it's not entirely unprecedented. I would say that there were escalations, like similar escalations in the past. There's been like a consistent thread of threatening, like families of politicians, of oppositionaries, threatening actual oppositionaries. For example, like a couple of days ago, the director of the law chamber, or like the basically like Serbian, the North of the Regions Association of Lawyers, his car was burnt and stuff like this. So I think that Serbia and the Serbian regime has a history of silencing, threatening, but also beating up and even killing journalists and oppositionaries. So like, think about Zoran Đinđić, who was our prime minister. He was basically sniped out.
But this is a while ago.
That was a while ago. I do have to say, I think that you're right in the most recent frame of developments. I think that things are kind of stepping up, and like the tensions are running really high, and not just in Serbia, but also in like Republika Srpska, Kosovo. So it just seems like everything is kind of boiling up.
It's kind of happened around this time of year for the last couple years. There were some serious clashes last year or the year before around winter, to the point where I was going to actually head out. I think the reason we ever first got in contact was because of clashes, and we were going to go out and cover it. It seems to happen every year and then die out. Do you think it's going to happen again this year, or are people just done now?
Well, that's a very difficult question. From what I can see, I think now there is a small break in the protest. Like they kind of had this momentum for about 2 weeks. There was even like a really large gathering on, I think it was like last Saturday. And I think there were about like 20,000 people or something in Belgrade. Like it was really big. And I think that the awareness is growing. And the opposition says that they will not stop fighting. But I do have a bit of concern with simply the feasibility of this, because everything is controlled by the SNS. Like everything is controlled by Vucic. And you have this kind of oppositionary force. You have this rage of the citizens. Like people are increasingly unhappier because they just see the consequences of living in a state controlled by mafia, right? So definitely that's growing, but is that enough to counterbalance a regime like this? I'm really not sure.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much you can do with clashes, riots, if you know what I'm saying. If they're prepared to go and literally attack and hospitalize the leader of the opposition, one that people were very hopeful for, at least some of the community were. Doesn't look like anything is gonna happen with like a Maidan situation. Not at this stage, I don't think. I certainly think if Russia is behind a lot of this, which there's a lot of evidence they are, not behind it, but in hand with the government in Serbia currently, they're gonna learn a lot from that process. You see what I'm saying? I don't think that would actually do much.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that the main struggle is going to be happening on the streets in a kind of Maidan scenario. I think that that scenario would also really play well for the government because their main criticism of this big opposition party, Serbia Against Violence, is that, oh, look at them, they are actually violent. So they're thugs, they're trying to destabilize us, they're using violence. So that, like, violence has been the ultimate tool for our government, for this regime, forever, basically. And that's the really difficult thing. How do you fight them against violence? Is it even possible? I mean, that's the big question.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's not good to have mass violence. We know how quickly that can get out of hand in the Balkans. But sometimes it gets to a degree, I think, where it's like, well, if the power is so monopolized, I don't know personally what else can even disrupt it other than like paramilitary activity, because it's clear that the political route isn't going to work. Now, of course, I am absolutely not advocating for that. I just mean, like, kind of factually, if you look historically, what else can you do when you try and do everything right, when you try and do the political thing? Then what is left, which, my point being, it seems like a very precarious situation right now. They tried to do the political situation, they tried to do it democratically, and still things like this happen. I can just see it now. If something gets out of hand and there's some kind of like militancy, I can already see it now. Like, oh, look at these violent people. It's like, well, not really. This is the end of a very long story.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I totally agree with that. And like, I really don't know like what else, really, like, what else can you do? You tried to do it democratically. You tried having your own observers there. You invite all of these international observers. You're like, look, it's about to happen. It happened. We have evidence. Why isn't anyone doing anything? And then you're like, okay, let me go and speak up about it on the streets. What happens? You get beaten by riot cops. And like, Russia is like, I mean, it's completely insane. But I think it's interesting, like, to kind of look at the future and the near future of developments that are going to happen, because like we talked about the Serbian world ideology rising, and then obviously like things in Kosovo are heating up, things in the Republika Srpska are heating up. Like, everybody is kind of like flirting with these extremist ideas, and Vucic is becoming really cocky, like, I would say, even with the West, because so far, like, since he got in power, he's been playing this political game where he appeases the EU, at least on paper. Like, he's pretending that we are, growing, the infrastructure is growing, and like he's building all of these big roads and projects and like blah blah blah, very fancy. But then internally it's been getting worse and like more repressive. But at the same time, he then refuses to sanction Russia, because obviously that's been one of our alleged allies in history. And then taking all of this money from China as well, taking like Chinese facial recognition systems, taking investment that's quite problematic and like, human rights violating, basically. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting to see that now Vucic is saying like, "Oh, the West is trying to meddle with our elections," and I think he's even writing up some kind of like report about how Germany and Berlin, in particular, is meddling with our with our election process. So that's kind of cocky. Like, I think
That's
that
very cocky. The
his
irony, right?
rhetoric is like growing, and I mean, there's even like this very funny comparison that I saw recently. But basically, like, there's this comedian in Serbia who kind of like has a show where he talks about, or just like shows different politicians and then kind of makes fun of them, and there's a lot of material for this stuff. But basically, Vucic, on the one hand, he gave this BBC interview recently with Christiane Amanpour, who built a career on criticizing like the Serbian government since the 90s, right? And then on the other hand, you have Vucic talking about the same kind of stuff on Happy Television on this like show called Chirilica. And if you remember, like last time we talked about these reality shows, and like Happy is one of the places where they show these extremely violent reality shows, right? So in the BBC interview, Vucic is like every time the interviewer asks something, he's like, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's so valuable. I really appreciate you letting me speak. And like everything he says is so like, I mean, sorry to say this, but kind of sounds a bit cocky, you know? And then, like, on the same type of interview on Happy Television, where he's being interviewed by this like host who is like the stereotypical villain. Like he looks like a villain, he sounds like a villain. His name is Miomir Maric, and he always interviews war criminals. And in this show, Vucic is like, yeah, like I showed her like Christian Amanpour basically like humiliated her. She had nothing to say. And like he's acting like he totally like owned her in that interview. Well, that's obviously not the case. And the host is just kind of gassing him up, like, yeah, you showed them like big, strong Serbian leader, blah blah blah. No, it's just completely insane.
Yeah, it sounds extremely cringe.
It is cringe. I mean, it's like some of the stuff is like villain from movie type of scenario. Like when Vucic won, he even posted this video of him like driving around in a car with the current mayor of Belgrade, who's also a total fraud and criminal. And they're singing something like, oh, another 4 years, like whatever, some like random Turbofolk song or some shit. And they're like kind of like saying, we're going to be in power for another 4 years. And like, we are going to post this video of us singing in a car of like how we're going to dominate the people and nobody else is going to be able to do anything about it. Like, it's just bully behavior.
I was gonna say, yeah, it sounds like real bully boys. You know what I'm saying? Like they're like, how? What are you gonna do about this? And kind of they've consolidated to the point where it's like, well, there's not really anything anyone can do by the sounds of it. I guess the only good thing that I saw whilst looking into this was that the like, I mean, I don't want to say the far right because ironically, whilst Vucic is called like progressive party, it's not that. But the extreme right wing kind of got defeated, right? Like they didn't get much in this election.
Yeah. Yeah, that was just funny. That was like just straight up funny because I mean, but weirdly enough, I even feel sorry for them because you look at them and they're so devastated. They're like, we're gonna step out of politics because we didn't even get like 2 minutes of TV national time. And like, fuck, this person is just taking everything over. And like, don't forget, Vucic was the Minister of Information under Slobodan Milosevic. He knows exactly what he's doing with the information space, with the media space. He knows how to manipulate it to make sure that all opponents are just taken down.
Has he got much? Like, has he said anything about these allegations that he's rigged the election? Has he got much like response to it, or does he just not care?
Oh, he did have a response, of course. He said these elections were the fairest and the cleanest in Serbian history.
Well, okay, all right.
Yeah. No, he's never gonna just be like, "Oh, I have no response." No, he loves to come on TV and like just stand in front of the camera and not blink and just like have these ridiculous statements like, "Look at all this. They're trying to destabilize our beautiful Serbia. Meanwhile, me, I'm getting jobs for people, I'm creating infrastructure. These were the fairest elections. We won because the people of Serbia want us. And these thugs are trying to take it away from us." And like, God, you are so ridiculous, dude. Like, he even made this. Oh my God, this was crazy. He made this promo video before the elections. And he's not even the president of the party, right? But he's still making promo videos. And in the video, he's like, there's like Lord Voldemort. There's like a scene with Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter. And then all of a sudden, Lord Voldemort, like what, like Ralph Fiennes, is that the actor? He's like appearing in Serbia and like is about to like, do a handshake with Vucic. And then Vucic is like, look, Lord Voldemort is Serbian. That's his like electoral campaign.
Serbia is so crazy. Like, that is just so crazy, man. I mean, well, I say that you should see the fucking. So our prime minister, I mean, he's like, I've seen ants with more backbone than this guy, but he just did like a fucking advert with like Coca-Cola where he's like working late in the office and starts playing around. I mean, it's no less absurd, to be honest with you. I don't know what's going on these days. Like, I just don't understand it all. It's crazy. With that said, is there anything like in the near future that you think might work? I don't know. What are the youth saying? Is there any hope?
Well, yeah, there is a sort of new wave of like young people, and they have been more present in the last protests, I would say. And I think that they even had an interesting, I wouldn't call it like a clash point, but it was definitely like a tension between the older opposition and them. Because at some point, they came up to the opposition, like when they were protesting to basically like cancel the elections, and the young people were like, you haven't done shit, like you've been trying to do something, you're way too slow, like you're not doing anything, like literally they were like cursing at the opposition, and for like a fair criticism, totally. So I think that there's this like new kind of recruitment, there's more like stuff on social media happening, and I think that definitely they're trying to mobilize, at least digitally, more and more people. But I think the biggest problem is, how do you get this big part of the population that isn't entirely pro EU, or is like not agreeing with all the points that are kind of like pro European? And like, look, that's valid, and these people also need to have their voices heard. Like, it has to be kind of addressed. So I think that in the near future, it's going to be more of like a conversation between this new like young wave, and then trying to wake up this generation who like just isn't feeling like their voice is acknowledged.
Yeah, and when they do wake up, they wake up in a big way. Like, Serbs are no joke. Just culturally, you guys don't really do things by half.
No, 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 not at all. It's called the Serbian Inat, which is, it means spite. So I feel like that's been like the main principle of our culture for the last several centuries, at least.
And with spite comes revenge, right?
Yep.
Well, let's hope things improve. And I'm glad you come on to do this, because there's, again, constantly trying to battle this fucking Balkan caricature. You see a lot of people like, haha, the stupid Serbs are at it again. And it's like, no, these are fucking real people. Clearly, there's a lot of upset about this scoundrel in office. And for some reason, it gets glossed over quite a lot. So I really appreciate you coming on and kind of laying it out for us. If people want to get in touch with you and know more, speak further about your work or Serbia, where can they do that?
They can contact me in my email. It's jomaksic@gmail.com. I feel like that would be the best way. So yeah, just feel free to find me there. You can also find my Instagram. It's called Ambient Content. It's not so much like sharing on all of this, but if you want me to help you with some aspect of the research, I'll gladly do that. Or if you just want to talk about any of the ideas I presented here, like, feel free to reach out. I'm always down to have a conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me again.
That was the Popular Front podcast. If you want more exclusive bonus episodes, extra video content, access to the Popular Front network, subscribe to patreon.com/popularfront. We're entirely independent and grassroots. Nobody owns us. Patreon keeps us going, as does our merchandise. You can get Popular Front apparel and accessories at popularfront.shop. You can also buy our various publications there, like the Popular Front magazine. We're censored on social media and streaming platforms, so please follow us and share our content. Watch our documentaries at youtube.com/popularfront. Follow us on Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfront_. And for uncensored updates on the world at war, follow our Telegram at PopularXFront. you want to keep track of my other work, it's the same on all socials at Jake_Hanrahan. That's HANRAHAN. You can find all these links and more at popularfront.cc. The music in this episode was produced by Sam Black. Check him out at samblackpf.com or search Sam Black PF on Spotify. The intro music though is by Home. If you want to advertise with us, email jake@hanrahan.tv. Thank you to the Patreons on the credit tier. They are Onofrio Madogno, Thomas Sadowski, Pengu, Jessica, Peter Cherry, Lupe Calderon-Garnica, Thomas Giuseppe, Viola Forvel, Christian Bustamante, Daniel Verdin, Margosha, Rohan, Ryan Barbadillo, VS, Brian R, Evan Pank, Bradley Hope, Wizard Actual, Benjamin Topper, Siddhartha O, Damien, Cameron Collins, Scott Turnbull, Matthew Diffley, Claire, Liana, Robert, Sean, Cusinart 8, Christian Orvich, NTHG, Ethan Schwick, Peter Nybratton, Gabriel K, David McManus, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Bradley Davies, No Dogs No Hamsters, Brendan Crave, B, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, Adam H, B, Rambo, Larson 8669, Ivan Julien, Diamondstein, Michael O'Connor, Nicholas Butter, JD, James Karpinski, Jav, James Cully, Ethan Fitzmadrid, Ed Coulthard, D. San, Mike Barone, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Propaganda, DZA, Giorgio Arani, Vegan Straight Edge, Amy, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Caitlin Wicks, Michael, Neck, Freya Northman, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Chad Walker, What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock and Maurice Zumbul. Thank you all so much. Really do appreciate it. Support us, patreon.com/popularfront.